Alrighty, guys. So this is gonna be a bit of a longer one because we have a whole lot that we have to go over. um, First things first, you should have Unity open. Uh, what we're looking at right now, you might be seeing something a little bit different than mine. Because you can edit Unity's interface all kinds of different ways. This is actually one of my first times looking at Unity 6, and it's even different from when I usually use Unity. Because as I said in the previous video, when you start working in a project, you generally try and keep it the same. So one thing that I would like us all to do right out the gate is let's go up to layout in the top right and let's switch everything to default. That should make our engines look the same because Unity has a couple pre-made layouts. And if you hear scritchy scratchies in the back, I have two wild children over there. So do forgive me with that. Hopefully that they will stay calm during this recording. Um, Unity is you can really set it up to look however you want, and it is incredibly overwhelming the first time you own it because or open it because what am I looking at here? You have these things down here, you have things over here, you have this big old window here with all these buttons. Take a breath. We're gonna go step by step. We're gonna go through everything. First thing, before you even decide what any of these things are, I would like to say that you can drag and change however things look, and you'll see me do that throughout all of our videos, right? So I can take this scene tab, right? I'll tell you right now, the scene tab is where you actually build things, right? It's where you go ahead and drag things in, move them around, all that stuff. But anything that's a tab can be dragged around, and whenever you see these vertical or horizontal lines, you can generally go about maneuvering them around to make things look a little bit nicer. We can go back and hit default one more time so that way then it refreshes back. But that's how you go about editing views. If you see me looking over to the left here, it's because that's where my notes are. I want to make sure I keep an eye on those so I'm getting everything to you guys. Um, the first tab out of all this that is probably the most important is our project tab. This is, I believe I said it in one of the videos earlier. If not, I'm going to say it now. One of the most important things in working in any kind of computer software is being able to navigate your file explorer. On Mac, it's called Finder. In Windows, it's called File Explorer. It's knowing where your files are. And your project folder or project window down below, thank you, Adobe, just beeped at me. Your project window down below is one of the. One second, dog has to go out. All right, dog is out. So, what were we talking about? We're talking about the project tab. Project tab is basically your window into your file explorer. It is all the assets, all the files, all the things that you go ahead and put in your project, but not the things that are currently in the level you're working on, right? So right out the gate, it's a little bit confusing because there's already stuff in here. We didn't put anything in here. As Unity's gone on, they've added more and more things that just come default with every project. And one of the things that I really like that they added is a scenes folder. So if we go ahead and take a look, open that up, we can see that it has a sample scene in it. And if we look over here, we'll talk about what the hierarchy is in just a few minutes. We'll notice that we're working in our sample scene. A scene is basically just a level, right? So we are currently in the sample scene. That's our sample scene level. Our assets are is a view into our file explorer, and a really good way to like make that mental connection is right click anywhere in your assets folder. Well, not anywhere. Uh, if I click on assets, I wouldn't want to right click on one of these objects. I guess you could, but it makes more sense to me. Click in the empty area and hit show in Explorer. And you'll see right away that this should be where you saved your Unity project. I named it my first project, right? And there's my assets, libraries, logs, packages. Most of this you don't have to worry about too much, right? But if I go into assets, see all kinds of stuff that they have in here, but there's my scenes folder, there's my settings, there's scenes, there's settings. If I look at this default volume profile, yep, it's right there. And if I look at my input system, it's right there. Universal render pipeline, it's right there, right? These meta files, don't really need to worry about them too much right now. We'll talk about that more later. So that's what our project tab is. Now, every project that you ever work in is going to need some kind of organization. And we can see right here, we've already got folders for scenes, for settings. Levels are one type of asset that we have in games. We also have scripts, sound effects, particle effects, art, sprites, all these things. So we're going to make a couple more folders. Whenever we want to make a new thing in our assets folder, we do the same thing we did before. We right click, we go to create, we get all kinds of options, right? What we want to do is make some folders. This is just so that we have our organization set up. We're going to make a sprites folder. And if you hear me clicking, or let's not name it sprites folder, let's just name it sprites. My apologies, I have a bit of a loud keyboard. Sprites, scripts, and I think that's all we'll need right now. So what these are is it's just pure organization. Now, if you're in my class, I will take points if you don't keep your assets organized. So please, please, please keep up on that. Again, if you're in 110, you should have access to some sprites right out the get-go on our Canvas site. So I would go download those if we and then get them up in your file explorer, right? You'll notice I can drag this Jumpstart Breakout Art asset straight in, but it's a zip folder. You really don't want a zip folder just shown out in your assets folder. It doesn't do anything. So what I'm going to want us to do is right click on it, hit extract. I've already done this once. It came up with a little pop-up right over here. I'm gonna replace it, whatever, and open that up. And you'll see that we have a couple different sprites in here, right? These are ones that we're going to be using to make our breakout game, and you can use in your Pong project should you choose to. I'm going to take these guys and drag them not into my assets folder. If I do, it's not the end of the world. I can just move them. But I'm going to drag them into my sprites folder. You notice they didn't leave in here. They made copies over, right? So if I go look at my sprites, I should see them now in Unity. Now, when I start clicking on these, click on a button. Start clicking on these, you should see something changing on your screen. Our inspector. I think that's probably, yeah, the next thing that we should probably look at is what is this? The inspector inspects whatever you have selected, right? If I look over here, I can see that this is a sprite. It's set to sprite mode multiple. We'll talk about this stuff more later, but it kind of gives you all the details about the object that you've selected. Now, my 2 cents says we should probably add our background in to our game first. You might be thinking, whoa, there's all these other windows we haven't really done much with. Well, let's just go ahead and trust me on this one. Let's take our background and drag it into our hierarchy. Now you see a couple different things happened here. First of all, flash blue. That's just because it was loading the renderer. It's the first object dropped in, right? But you'll notice there's a couple other objects in here that we didn't notice before. Good to delete my background. You can leave it there. This is the mode we were in right now. Sample scene kind of acted as a folder. We've always had this global light 2D and this main camera. I'm going to go ahead and drag the background in one more time. And we'll notice that it is dragged in. I like dragging it into the hierarchy because it puts it at 0, 0, 0. This transform over here is like the position, rotation, and scale information about any object that we've dragged into the hierarchy or into our level. You don't have to do this, but I am going to drag another background in. Just put it over here, and you'll notice that its position is not 0, 0, 0. I like dragging things in the hierarchy because 0, 0, 0 is the origin of your game. You will go far beyond that position, but it's it works really well just to keep things in one spot. Looking at my notes real quick. So you might notice that we have this white border around not really around our background. That would be our camera. If I take my camera and change its position around a little bit, you'll notice that it changes. We don't really want to do that. And you can edit all these different things in the hierarchy. Gives you all kinds of options. You can rotate, you can scale, you can do change its position. But what I think I'm going to do next is just play with the size. I can kind of tweak it so that way then it fits, but not really. And that's because our camera is tied directly to our game view. And you might have noticed this game tab right over here. I'm going to, and I suggest do this because you generally want to keep an eye on your game and an eye on your scene. I'm going to drag my game view over here. And you'll notice that the camera's acting kind of weird. It's, as I change the game view, the camera size, its white box, is changing quite a bit. That's because the default mode Unity opens up in is something called free aspect. I'm going to tell you right now, you never really want it in free aspect. Maybe in a 3D game, there are some reasons, but generally not so much. We're going to click on this free aspect, and it's going to give us a lot of different options. It's going to give us some resolutions. It's going to give us some aspect ratios. I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to 16:9 aspect ratio because 16:9 is the most common aspect ratio of screens in general. I want you to take a second and just think, what is the most common resolution that you've seen? Usually 1920 by 1080. And that, if you bring it down to a ratio, is 16:9. And you'll notice now that if I change my game window, the camera is not changing its overall shape. In fact, we're always keeping the same amount of game in view. So what should the size be? If I could change the size and get it just right. This is really a not so great way to do that, though. This is where math comes in. Everybody talks about, oh, making games, you have to use lots of math. Generally, no. You don't. But there are some things that are useful. I'll tell you right now, and this is something that you generally have to look up. Actually, does it just say if we hover over it? No. That would be too easy. The size is the distance from the center of the camera, where this icon is, to the top or bottom, right? It is always talking about the height, and we are right now about 5.35 Unity units from the middle to the top. And you might be asking yourself, what the heck is a Unity unit? That is completely dependent on, well, that's a constant, but how many Unity units our sprites take up is dependent on a couple things. Click on the sprite. You can see right here we have a pixels per unit metric, which it says 100. So if bring this up a little bit, our background is, I did this last time I recorded this video. I'm gonna move my head. Whee! Over here, we see that it's 1920 by 1080 pixels, and we have 100 pixels per unit. How many Unity units tall is our background? It would be 10.8. Now, if I go to my camera, we said the size is from the center to the top, that's half. So 10.8 divided by 2 would be 5.4. And you should then get the red border perfectly around the edges and your camera sized correctly. This is the kind of stuff that the inspector lets you do. It lets you play with variables, it lets you change some things. And now we have a background. So let's keep adding things, right? Check in to make sure I didn't miss anything there. Let's go ahead and, because this is a very boring game, it doesn't really do anything. Again, if you hear tippy taps in the back of you, you can see her in the corner. I'm gonna move my head back over this way because it's a little bit better. We're gonna drag our ball in. Something interesting is happening. Ball's not there, the outline's there. What's going on is the ball is behind our background. Bit of a problem. You might be thinking to yourself, well, it's a 2D game. There shouldn't be any depth, but you always have things rendering in an order. Some things will render over the other, and there's a couple different ways we can change this. The secret about 2D games in Unity is Unity was originally built as a 3D game engine. 2D came later. So we have this button up here. Now, 2D Unity comes with a whole bunch of different packages. If we look down in the bottom left over here, you'll see it comes with all these 2D things. It used to all just be in Unity, and you had everything. It was a big bloated mess. If I hit this 2D button, you will notice that 2D Unity is just 3D looking at a specific angle. All right, I can move around. I can look at all these different things. Generally, you're going to want to work in 2D no matter what when you're working in a 2D game. But just for the sake of this example, I want to look at our main camera. It's looking at our background almost like it's a camera in a recording something, right? It's looking at our background and looking at everything to infinity and saying, well, I'm going to render whatever's closer to me first. So theoretically, I should be able to go click on my ball, and I'm going to move it back into the middle. And if I bring it back, it'll pop up. There it is. Now, if that was the way that you thought about going about this, you're not wrong, but I want you to think about something. When we start adding collision and physics and all these different things, if I have, let's say I'm looking my background here, my ball here, well, they're not really going to collide, right? They're not going to hit each other. They might, theoretically, like Unity might do some magic. I haven't actually tested that because this isn't the way you're supposed to go about doing this. But they shouldn't, right? It doesn't logically make sense that they would. So I'm going to put my ball back to 0, 0. And I'm going to put its position actually 0, 0, 0. Put my stuff back to duty. And I want us to look at these additional settings on the ball. We have a sorting layer, order in layer. I want us, just for the sake of testing, to make our order in layer 1. And you'll notice your ball pops right back up. Now, if I were to go to my background and make its order in layer 2, the background would render over. So what this does is it says, okay, render everything on order in layer 0 first, then everything in 1. So it's putting it all kind of like a folder, right? Now, you might be thinking, what if I have 1,000 sprites in my game? That's going to be a lot of numbers for me to get to take care of. If we hit this default section, we can add sorting layers. Sorting layers are really, really important. So let's go ahead and do that. We have the default here. And if we hit this little plus, we can say, let's name it environment. Let's do it again, and let's add gameplay. That's new. Those rendering layers did not used to be there. I'm very excited to see what all we get to do with that. Now, I have my background. It's on default. I have my ball. It's on default. For the sake, obviously, background, we're going to put it on environment. But just to test things, what happens if I put it on gameplay? Renders over, even though it's at 0. That's because you can think of these as folders to put your layers in. So I'm going to put this on environment. I'm going to put the ball on gameplay. I'm going to put the ball at 0. And you'll notice that we are rendering the environment first and then the gameplay over it. Really interesting. It's a cleaner way of going about rendering your stuff, and everything is still at 0 depth. Like it's Z. Now, I talked about all these different things, and we went over like the some stuff in the inspector. Your hierarchy, we've just kind of been adding things to the scene. It's your grocery list of items going through everything that's in the current level. So this global light, if I turn it off, nothing really happens. Because lighting generally, unless you've messed with some settings, does not matter too much when it comes to Unity, right? Or in 2D, sorry. It's not something that you really have to worry about too much. And in fact, if I change the color, it popped up over here, you'll notice nothing's really changing. We'll talk about this later, but it's not something that I would worry about all that much. I am going to set it right back to white though. Oh, hold on, I have it turned off. Let me do that one more time and check. It does actually affect it. Whoops. So if I were to go and bring it down, bring its intensity down, we'll notice it getting darker. But in the absence of any light, let me put it back to white. I don't know why it keeps popping up on my other screen. In the absence of any light, it still acts as if everything is lit. The reason is you can have an unlit game, but as soon as you add lights, the lights start affecting things. Where do we want to go from here? Hierarchies list, inspectors where you edit things, project is your file explorer, console is where you get stuff from your code. We'll talk about that once we get to scripting. The next big thing I want us to talk about is these tools over here. We're going to ignore these for now, the ones down here. I say that as I start clicking it. Kind of cool. These are all new. So, this hand tool up at the top lets you drag around and pan. You can also do that by scrolling. You most of the time are going to want to use a mouse during while you're working in Unity because it's just bad otherwise. I worked on a touchpad for many, many years and do not recommend. The tool right underneath it is the move tool. You can move stuff by moving around the position in the inspector, but you can also, let's grab the ball, not the global light, drag this around as well, just by moving it around. Next tool is your rotate tool, which doesn't really work super great with a ball, but the background, we can rotate it around. Control Z undoes all this stuff. Next tool is your scale tool. This is dangerous because, especially when working in 2D, if I scale up, let's do my background because it's what's going to look best. If I scale it up, you're going to notice I start seeing some artifacts, some issues with my sprites. Your artist will decapitate you brutally if you go and start scaling up their sprites because they don't keep their resolution. This next tool is more of a UI object, though it does still work for scale. You can scale 2D things. It's not very used in 3D. It's usually used for UI just because it keeps everything scaled in a specific way. And this last tool, I hate it. I hate it so much. It is your move, scale, rotate, all built into one. And I think it's a really silly tool to use when you have all these different just individuals. I always end up clicking something on accident and I start rotating when I mean to move, all that good stuff. This is a really boring game. Not winning any awards, for sure. We've looked at the inspector, we've looked at the project window, we've looked at the hierarchy, the scene, the game, all these different things. I think it's time we hit play and see what the fruits of our labor have done. That's that button up here at the top. Don't really do anything. It's not great. Let's add some stuff. We've talked about the stuff that's in the hierarchy, this transform, this sprite renderer. All of these are what we call components, right? Components are things you are going to be writing, you're going to be working on, you're going to be working with all throughout your time messing around in Unity. So on the ball, I want to have it selected. I'm going to hit add component. And I had to search earlier when I was working. We're going to search for rigid body 2D. Now, this is something that everybody's going to make this mistake. Promise you that. But Unity, again, was built for 3D first. So you can see there's rigid body and there's rigid body 2D. When working in 2D, you generally want to check to make sure, at least with your physics assets or components, that you want to be working with the 2D options. So I'm going to add this rigid body. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hit play. You might be asking, well, what is a rigid body? It gives your objects physics. So there it goes. So it's falling. The game's so much more exciting now. This might actually win Game of the Year. Not really. I'm lying. I'm going to now. Let's say you added a component you didn't want to. You can right click it and remove. I do want to show one thing, and it's only I can only really do this when there's no rigid body. Let's say I'm setting up my level, right? And I want to move my ball over to the middle, right? But I'm in play mode. There's a trick that, or this is an issue that almost everybody that I teach runs into at some point. If I get out of play mode, it does not save. There are some very small cases where things do save, but generally you do not want to be working in play mode. Really good for testing something, but not good for changes you actually want to keep. So I'm going to go ahead and add my rigid body again, because that was cool. We want that. You can actually have things start colliding. Like, if we're making a brick breaker game, it makes sense for things to, like, be bouncing around, colliding, doing things. So with my rigid body, there's that. The next thing, it gives it physics, but it doesn't give it anything to, like, any boundaries. I'm going to go ahead and add component again, and add a circle collider. And if I scroll in on the orb, you'll see that I have a green border around it now. That means it has a collider. And if I click this edit collider button, I can go ahead and you'll notice there are these little squares. They're very, very small, kind of hard to see. I can go ahead and drag them though to change the size and shape of my collider. I can mess with it in the inspector by changing its radius here. I can change its offset if I wanted to have a really confusing game and have the orb, like or the ball, its collision to be over to the side. All kinds of options for us. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and hit play. Maybe get something happening. No. Because for any collision to happen, there has to be two things to collide with, right? So we need to add a collider to our background. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to add a box collider 2D. Let's see what happens. It didn't work. The reason is because of box collider, if I hit this little edit tool, you could hit the boundaries of it, but if you're inside of it, it's kind of like spawning into a wall. It's not what you want. We have other collider options though. We can add an edge collider, and if I drag the ball up a little bit, this will work, but it doesn't work out the box. Not the way we want. There we go. Now, if I click on background, you'll notice my edge collider is just straight across this green line and just goes straight across. Now, if I look at all the information I have over here on the edge collider, there's a point section. And if I were to, I don't know, make the first point drop a little bit, we'll notice the ball rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls until it falls right off. These points make up the points of the edge collider. So, what would happen if I made a box with them? I'm going to go ahead and give it 5 points, and I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it will by the time we're done. Not 54, that's bad. 5, and I'm going to move my head over. Now, I have my first point at negative 9.6. Where did that number come from? Unity just kind of put it in there. Well, it got the radius, the width of the sprite I put it on. Because if we go back over to our sprites, look at our background, we have 1920. 1920 divided by 2 is, well, 1920 with 100 pixels per unit means it's really 19.2. 19.2 divided by 2 is 9.6. So if we're starting at 0, 0, right over here, we want to go to the left to the edge, we would want a negative 9.6. The positive would be positive 9.6. And with these numbers, we can go ahead and say, well, our first point is negative 9.6. We said that the top was 5.4. The next one would also get a 5.4. 4. And we can see we're starting to get, I'm going to put these at 5.8 just so that we can see a little bit. We're starting to see our edge build its like boundary. I'm going to do these a little bit offset so that we can see it, but we'll edit them back in just a bit. Whoop. Clicked off of it. Let's keep editing these. So 9.8, negative 9.8 to 9.8. X is still going to stay 9.8, so let me change that real quick. But Y is now negative, so it's going to be negative 5.8. Then it's going to be negative 9.8 to get the bottom left corner, negative 5.8, and then here's that last line, right? We have to finish the box. So I'm going to say 5.8 and negative 9.8. And with that, you can see we have a border all the way around our box. Now I'm going to change all these 8s to 6s again, just because I wanted to be able to see it. And I will admit, Unity, get on a better level here. You can change the colors of these if you want, of like the colliders, but did I miss one? There it is. Still taller. Did I goof my math? Oh my god. It's 5.4. It's not 5.6. I'm a fool. I am always the first to admit when I am wrong. This should be 5.4, 4, 4, 4, and 4. There you go. Now it fits perfectly. So now we have a border around our background. And if we go and hit play, the ball will drop. And the ball should, theoretically, hit the bottom. Now, I've had bad experience with edge colliders, right? Sometimes they just don't work the way I want them to. So, there's a million different ways to do things in Unity. I'm going to remove the edge collider component. And what I'm going to do is underneath, add a square. This is what we call childing object. I'm going to put this square over to the left, give it a box collider. And scale it up so that we have a left border. We duplicate it with Control D. We have a right border. Duplicate it again. Scale it a little differently. We have a top border. And we have a bottom border. Now, this will work exactly the same as we just did with the edge collider. You might be asking, well, why do that? In my opinion, this makes our coding a little bit easier. But I also like being able to potentially change things up, right? I don't have to go mess with points. Maybe I want to have little gaps in the colliders. You wouldn't be able to do that with an edge collider. This, to me, is a more robust solution. It means something that would require less, is more easily expandable. Now, if I hit play, you just saw how, it fell. Still kind of boring. Last thing we're going to do in this video, we're going to add a little bit more fun. We're going to create a new folder and call it materials. And in materials, we're going to go and not this material. We're going to go to 2D and add physics material 2D and call it bouncy. Now, I'm going to go ahead and change this bounciness to 1. Click on the ball. Drag the bouncy material into the material section of our rigid body and let it rip. Bong. Now, with a bounciness of 1, it should always return to about, I'm noticing, oh no, it's getting a little bit further every time. So it's going to keep bouncing, keep bouncing, keep bouncing. And now it's bouncing back, bouncing back. See? Is it going to bounce through? Sometimes that happens. Now we have a little bit more of an interesting game. Something we can actually get started with. And with that, I think we're going to end this video. We've gone through all of our windows. We've got some sprites in. We talked about sprites and Unity units and getting colliders in and physics in. We did a whole lot. So go treat yourself to something, take a break, and come back in a little bit, and let's look at the next thing.